You're not cheating on your wife if you eat my lemon square.
Your lemon squares taste like ass.
All right, and welcome to another Horror Queers Hangout. It's part 2 of our State of Queer Horror Talk, and this time we are joined by Kay Lynch of the Salem Horror Fest, as well as Bobby Torrez from The People Under the Scares. How you doing, folks?
Great, how are you?
Wonderful.
I was just excited. I was like, "Yay, Bobby!"
Oh, man. Every time, Bobby, every time I hear your name, though, I'm just like, Booby likes it spooky. But that's always what I go for.
You know what's funny? I got a message like right after I did y'all Krampus episode, and somebody said that to me in my DMs on Instagram. I'm like, come on, man, look where Trace started.
And you're like, this is a sext. I accept.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
I was fine with it.
Good.
I like spooky boobies.
Spooky boobies. There you go. Well, okay, so I was about to say listeners, viewers, if you're watching this, this is part 2 of this discussion where, we talked about a lot of queer representation kind of across all forms of media and genres last month. So if you haven't seen that, go check that out. But we're going to continue that conversation by narrowing it down to horror this month. So everyone, what do you think of the state of queer horror right now? Go.
I guess, can I go first? I guess I'll go first.
Yeah.
I think it's okay. I want to see more. I mean, I'm sure we're going to talk about it more as we go on with this episode, but I want to see more representation in all forms in the LGBTQ, part. Like I want to see a lot more, especially us leading roles more.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see much of that either. So I feel like they can do better casting us in more of these movies and TV shows and things like that, because they're doing okay with regular TV shows, but as far as horror, like it's not there. I don't see much of it, at least from my end.
Yeah.
I mean, in general, I think the state is improving, but we still have a long way to go. I think all the exciting things and the movement and the progress that we're making is happening on the indie front, which is actually really exciting, because I think it allows for more talent, and we're seeing more queer creators leading the projects and getting the funding. And I'm seeing I know that a lot of the smaller distributors are actively looking for queer content. There's not enough of it to meet the demand. But I feel like on the ground level, it's, people are mobilizing and trying to get it there. And I think that the real missing piece is that it's the creators that need the funding to tell queer stories.
So I'm interested to touch on what you were saying, though, about the demand is there, but we don't have the people that are making it. But do you think it's kind of like this kind of like snake eating its tail thing, where it's kind of like, well, the demand is there from some people, but not from financiers. But the demand is there from viewers. But again, that social media mentions, I guess, isn't enough for a financier to be like, yeah, sure, let me throw millions of dollars at this queer-led horror story.
Yeah, and I don't know what the solution is, other than just like the people with money, you gotta fucking get over it, because it's like the distributors are active. Like I talked to a lot of them, they're always asking, and we thankfully get a lot of really cool, exciting queer submissions for the festival, and I'm always quick to share them with the distributors, but they're always asking, and they're trying, but there's not enough.
Well, I think part of the problem too is that what we're seeing is the result, right? So in one way, we're almost removed from the creative portion of the equation, right? We're seeing the people who were successful in getting the financing, who were successful in then actually making the project, shepherding it through. And I don't know, I just think of all like the potential projects that didn't get that funding or that failed before they could get to completion. And I mean, Trace and I have had a number of really exciting conversations about horror shorts. And I can't help but wonder if it's because it's cheaper to make a short. Like you can do it in a weekend in your own apartment as opposed to trying to mount a feature. But we don't care about shorts in the same way that we care about features or TV shows, right?
That's right. I think that's in general too. The shorts is where a lot of people get to just kind of break into it and see what they're made, show what they're made of, get more experience. And I think that's where all the crazy stuff lives, is in the shorts, because there's a lot of ideas and concepts that you can't stretch out to a feature-length film, but you can put it in a short. And so I really wish there was more of a culture of watching shorts.
Well, but I do think though, so I mean, similar how you said, okay, like, we're seeing it more in the indie front than the mainstream front, which I absolutely agree with. But I also think that we saw it earlier more on the TV front than we were on the movie front. And so as much as we all like to bitch about everything Ryan Murphy, like American Horror Story was kind of groundbreaking for me as a viewer, in the sense that, like, we are telling like these very queer stories. You don't think of like movies, I'm like, okay, cool. So, the first time I remember seeing a gay character in a horror movie was, David in Bride of Chucky. And then moving into like the 2000s, like, I mean, representation wasn't great there. But like, you have your gay character, but then I think about something like, I mean, whether you're looking at the homophobes in Hostel Part 1 to the lesbian protagonist of Hostel Part 2, like, that's a really interesting, like, it could go one way or the other in queer representation in the mid 2000s. Yeah.
Well, but then we're seeing Chucky, I think, in TV. I mean, I just think that the TV series is like a monumental like moment in queer horror. Like, I really don't think it can be understated. I mean, one, just like the general legacy and the longevity of the franchise is, especially under the vision of like one creator, is a queer creator, is very exciting and unique. But the story, bringing Chucky to a TV series, I remember when they announced it, being like, who the fuck wants this?
No one cares.
What is it going to be? How could you possibly? And
go.
Yeah, Bobby. And it was amazing.
I was just saying I cared. That was it.
But not only is it a queer story from a queer creator, but it is the protagonist is a queer teenager. And I just think, I mean, and of course this was greenlit and produced before the latest wave of like anti-queer legislation, and everything is coming with it. But I think that it's just like a really beautiful moment and an opportunity for younger kids to see this representation.
Actually, now that, I mean, I know the Don Mancini is like obviously the go-to when we're talking about queer horror, because he is so he's like the king of queer horror, really, to an extent. But if you look at just the Child's Play franchise as a whole, from the first one to the TV show, it actually kind of mirrors like the progress of queer horror in general, like as we move from installment to installment, like we don't get our first like real explicit queerness until Bride of Chucky, which is late 90s. Everything before that is kind of just straightforward horror. And then, we have the mid 2000s with Seed of Chucky, which is just this kind of camptastic anomaly.
She's a messy bitch.
Very explicitly queer. And then, in the 2000s, we got Curse and Cult, which both have their versions of queer characters. And then, we have this queer-led TV show in 2021.
The romance. It's so good.
Yes, I love it.
Well, I want to come back. I want to come back to what you said, Bobby, because I think the question of representation is always firmly on my mind, because I think there's a lot of questions about like, what does good representation look like versus what kind of representation do we need or want? And I think for, like, hey, sorry, I cut you off. I think you were about to say, oh, the romance is really inspiring. It's like gateway horror for queer kids to say, hey, there's a place for you here. There's characters that mirror or echo your experience. And I guess I'm interested, do we feel like there's, I don't know, like Bobby, when you said you want to see more, what kind of more do you think we need more of? Oh boy, that was awkward. Okay.
So what I meant by that is that even with like horror and even some of the TV shows, when sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes when we're showcased, is always the stereotypical gay character that may be very feminine and always got to be like, you know, the star of the show and kind of be like the comedy relief, where there's a whole different types group of gay people. I myself don't really consider myself masculine or feminine, but I feel like I'm average, you know. So I've always been wanting more of stories. What happened to just a regular guy that just so happened to like men, rather than just making, you know, that one stereotypical gay character that's all on TV, not even just in horror, but in other TV shows and movies. I just want to see more. Yeah, right. And just like, well, go ahead, Trace.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt here. Just because, like, so yes, we're talking about, okay, what types of characters we want to see, but then that also comes into, especially when we're talking about like the protagonist, if we're making a protagonist queer, what types of stories do we want to see? Because I think, I mean, especially, and it's not really just relegated to queerness. It could go to, you know, like misogyny and everything too, where it's like, okay, well, why are you going to tell this story just to revel in the trauma of a certain like minority group? And those are very valid questions to have. But at the same time, when it's like, yeah, but we're talking about that within the horror genre, which lends itself to those types of stories. So again, I'm kind of like, I do get the argument for one way, but at the same time, I'm like, but like, yeah, you know, like, it lends itself to it.
Yeah.
I think that goes back to the creators though too, because we have like the new project, what's it called? They them.
They slash them.
They slash them. Oh,
the eye roll. The eye roll.
I did not put that together. When you say it out loud, it's kind of clever. But and I'm excited to see it. But it was just like, can we please just have gay people, queer people create these things? You know.
Yeah.
Well, that one actually is a queer creator. John Logan, the creator of like Penny Dreadful, is a queer man, but
not trans.
But not trans. No.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I should shut up then. I mean, that's something.
Well, no. But you're tapping into something, Cade, because I mean, we actually talked about this a little bit last week too. It was like with last month, where it was like, okay, how much of a pass do we give, be it queer creators or non-queer creators, when they are telling queer stories? Because yeah, okay, you can have someone who's not queer telling a queer story. Okay, that maybe is a red flag for some of us. Or you can have a cisgender gay man telling a transgender story, and then that also like has some kind of red flags you're raising there. But at the same time, it's like, but these stories are getting made, so it's that push and pull for me again.
I think it's just important to acknowledge the progress, to say like, okay, well, I guess, being a cis gay man is different than being, a trans man.
Very much.
Based on like what little we've had before, it's like, all right, we're inching forward, and I think it's important that these I hate the idea that we need to like support films just because of the creators, to I mean, I like that. I think it's nice personally, but like I hate the idea that like it's up to us to determine, and up to the creators to determine the future of queer stories. And it's like, no, just tell the stories, allow us to tell our stories. So because I just feel like then it's like you have one film that has good representation that doesn't do well, it's either not good or not successful, and then it gets cast upon all queer stories as being like, well, I guess people didn't want it.
I mean, yes.
I kind of felt some way to bring up a movie. I know it's not like a full feature. Well, is it a feature? Hulu Midnight. Is it Midnight Kiss?
Yeah. We'll call it a feature.
Okay, because that one, for like, I was excited for that one before like it was released. I'm like, all right, I'd like to see another, queer slasher film. And when I seen it, it was just repetitive to me. Like I didn't really see anything different, especially within the characters, where there were plenty of opportunity to switch up some of the characters and even the storyline a little bit. Like they could have done something so decent with that film, but it just, like, it was cool to see because there's representation again, but at the same time we've seen that before. So
it's very much that movie, I like that movie, but it's very much a certain sect of gay male culture. So I do understand, where it's like, okay, I mean, Yeah, exactly. But it's also kind of a thing where I'm like, oh, but they're kind of showing a lot of the bad things that we do as queer gays. but at the same time, it's like, but it's not inaccurate.
Yeah, I think part of what we're getting to, and we briefly touched on this in the last installment, is that if one movie comes out and it feels like the same story that we've seen before, but we're also only getting like one of these every 6 months, like, yeah, we want to go and support it. But at the same time, it feels like, okay, can we just have a bit of diversity in our storytelling or differences in the kinds of representation that we're seeing on screen? And the problem is that if we were getting more films or more TV shows, then we maybe wouldn't feel so frustrated with that. But when we're getting so little of it, it's like, Jesus fucking, this story again? Like, come on.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think we have to Halloween Kills, those gay characters, gay characters,
Big John, Little John.
Like that's
characters.
Yeah, I mean, outside of Chucky, that was one of the only mainstream studio representations of queer characters we got. I mean, in Candyman, there was a queer character,
right.
who I appreciated that they allowed that character to just be queer and they didn't need to comment on it, or it wasn't like this big essential plot point. So I do appreciate that, but it was also just that like a tiny role.
Yeah. Well, and because with that one, at least, though, I mean, like that character is definitely comic relief, but I don't ever think he's the butt of the joke. Whereas in Halloween Kills, those characters are comic relief, but I also kind of feel like they're the butt of the joke, which is why
100%.
Yeah.
But again, do I want to see more from that queer character in Candyman? Like, am I bummed that we don't see more of that character? Kinda, yeah. Like, I liked him.
Yeah, Troy was great, and he was one of the best. I love Candyman for a lot of reasons, but he was definitely one of the reasons why I enjoyed it. Because, like Kay said, like Troy wasn't pretty much like they didn't make it a big deal about him being queer. He just was the queer brother of one of the main characters, and they just let him be, which was great. But it's just sad because he was comedic relief, but it's like you want to see more of him, you know what I mean? So I'm hoping personally, if they do a sequel to this one, that we'll see more of him in a much bigger way, especially how it ended with his sister. So I would love to see more of him, because I feel like he would be, a different type of representation in, I guess, queer horror, I guess. I don't know. And is that actor queer in real life?
Nia DaCosta?
No. The actor.
Actor.
Oh, I think the actor is, because he often
because he plays a lot of roles. Yeah, he plays a lot of roles.
So I guess, are y'all wanting to see fewer of the like queer trauma stories, like something like Closet Monster? Like which I think is a fantastic movie, but are y'all kind of in the mindset where like, I'm tired of seeing stories like this? I'm ready for like, again, more integration. Maybe sounds like the bad word to use, but like just like we're having more quote unquote normal stories with queer characters instead of stories about the negative aspects or negative results of a character's queerness. I
mean, in general, when films do that, they focus on like the trauma porn aspect. To me, that's the studio making a film for non-queer people, kind of like trying to be like, oh, look how hard they're like,
look how bad it is,
be empathetic or whatever. And I do think it's important. Terrible things happen to everyone. But like if you look at Midsummer, that story arc wasn't about her being heterosexual. It was about her like issues with her boyfriend, and family. So it's like, okay, in addition to being oppressed or being attacked or whatever, all these things that a lot of us have to, unfortunately go through. It's like we also have our own family issues, and we also have relationship, problems that are in some way universal. And so it's like, we just want to see. It's not like we need to be reminded of our experience. We just want to be acknowledged as people who exist in the real world.
Yeah. And not defined by our queerness.
Right.
So wait, you want like three-dimensional queer characters who have like real lives and different kinds of issues. Okay,
Well, but
stop asking for so
I,
much.
I know it's asking a lot. I mean, there's a lot of movies who can't even do that for straight characters. So.
This is true.
I think you're onto something too, though, where you're like, this feels like it's made for non-queer people, which we talked about that opening scene of it, chapter 2 last week, right? Where it's like, yeah, this feels more like it's meant for straight viewers to be like, yeah, look at how bad gay bashing can be. Also, it can be worse. So I never really get my arms up where I'm like, no, I fuck that. Like, because I do think like, yeah, let's teach the non-queer people or show them things that we go through, things that happen. But yes, I also still do want things that are for me where it's like, I don't need this spoon fed to me. I already get some of this stuff. Like, just roll with it.
Yeah, the chapter two really, it was one of the few times that I felt genuinely hurt by a film. Because like I really loved the first one. I thought, and it was fun. I mean, it was dark and spooky, but it was a roller coaster ride. And so when I saw it, I was excited for the new film. I saw it at an advent screening, so there was, with a big crowd of people, the energy was up. I was like ready for a fun time. And then immediately right into the Laramie Project. It was like,
right, yeah.
And it took me off guard, and it wasn't just like. I don't think that it's like that is off limits for any kind of movie, especially horror movie, because we still haven't seen that experience much in horror either. But I just think the way it was done, it was so excessive. It triggered me personally. I felt so upset watching that. And it just felt like it was being used as like this gimmick. And I do think that there's a fine line there, because it's like, horror and like genre exploitation films do that. And I do appreciate that in a lot of ways, kind of, I don't know, just kind of leaning into these darker aspects of society. So I go back and forth of like, do I think they shouldn't have done it, or am I just I didn't want to see it?
There doesn't have to be an answer for that, right? Like, you cannot know, or yes can be the answer for everything.
Well, I think part of it too, and we touched on this with Danny and Terry in the last installment, because they had similar issues. And I think it was Danny who raised the point that it's because the rest of the film wasn't actually interested in exploring that. Like, if that hadn't been the movie, like, let's explore the ramifications of this queer trauma and like how Pennywise contributes to that, It Chapter 2 might have landed better among the queer community who felt very triggered by that opening. And, Kay, you mentioned if this was exploitation, then it's a bit more reasonable, but that's not what It Chapter 2 was. I'm thinking of, so at Bright Gown or Salem, I can't remember which one, KU programmed a film called Bad Girls, which is like super low budget indie. It's very like Faster Pussycat Kill Kill. It's about girls who like, steal money and go on a joyride, and they're just like shooting men all the time. And it's queer. Like, the girls are making out a whole bunch during that film, but tonally that's what the movie is the whole time. So like, when a bunch of them get fucking murdered over the course of this movie, it feels par for the course. Whereas with It Chapter 2, you're like, wait, this feels like a different movie.
Okay, I'm gonna bring up a title. I know Joe has seen it. I don't know if anyone else has seen it. And it actually includes a slur, so I'm gonna have to kind of dance around this. But it's ticked off transgender slurs with knives. Have y'all ever heard of or seen this movie?
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
It's a movie. I mean, again, you've got a slur in the title. The director is queer, but I don't think he's trans. But like Willem Belly's it. It's basically a lot of drag queens portraying drag queens that also might it's kind of ill-defined. Like, they are drag queens, but nevertheless, but that's an exploitation film, like, through and through. And there's a lot of like, there's sexual assault in it, there is murder, there's torture in it, all done like with drag queens. But it's a thing where it's like, ooh, but like, some people in the queer community took issue because of obviously just the name of the film, and that word gets thrown around so much in the world of the film. But so I bring that up only because it's a thing where I'm like, it's always case by case for me. Like, I can't blanket statement and say, oh, it's okay in this type of thing, but not this one, because I have to see how it's done in each film as it happens.
So when you say drag queens, do you mean like the performers, actors are drag queens in real
Yeah.
life, or the characters drag queens?
So yes to the performers. The actors are all drag queens in real life. The characters, it's less defined. I feel like some of them are actually trans and then others are not, but it's never like they're playing in like the Rose Room in Dallas, which is very famous for its drag shows. So maybe it's just me watching the movie, I'm like, oh, like they're drag queens because that's what they're doing. But yeah, so again, I would gently recommend this movie just to be like, just see what it is, but just go in knowing, yeah, this is an exploitation film that is really hammering down on trans trauma.
Yeah, I'd almost partner it with something like Death Drop Gorgeous, which feels like it takes a similar conceit, but does it with better taste, which is a funny thing to say about Death Drop Gorgeous because that movie sometimes lacks taste.
No, but I mean, like, you know, I'll go all the way back to John Waters, you know, like Female Trouble opens with Divine as a woman being raped by Divine as a man. And so we have a movie opening with a rape scene, but like, there's added layers there, and again, it's John Waters doing camp, so it's like, again, that's a very specific thing where I'm like, oh, like I'm not as bothered or triggered by this as I would with something else.
So my issue with, from what I'm hearing about this movie is, and it's an issue that I have in general, is like the idea equating drag queens with trans people is like very hurtful and annoying. And like, I personally can't watch Drag Race, and like nothing against anyone who enjoys it. I think it's done a lot of good. And I think that a lot of the people on it are extremely talented. But it's really annoying when people like meet me for the first time and are immediately like, oh, do you watch Drag Race? I'm like,
oh
no,
God,
this is not I'm not in drag. Like,
that happens with all gay men too, just so you know.
True. Well, and it's the same thing of like, oh, you're gay, let's go shopping, or you know, like, there's a lot, oh, you must listen to Lady Gaga. You know, there's a lot of those type of those type of like responses that people have. But yeah, so in general, it's like my issue with the concept of what is it, training with knives?
Ticked off trannies with knives. Yes.
If they were actually transgender people, you know, and characters, I mean, if they're performing on stage, like I know there are transgender performers, they do exist, but just culturally, I don't think that's what.
With this, okay, so let's bring this back then to some issues of representation, because I feel like one of the things that we're starting to see slight progress is increasingly queer actors, trans actors getting cast to play gay characters, trans characters, and so on. How do you feel about that moving forward? Is that something where it's like it's vitally important to us to see our own community members being accurately represented by these people? Or is it like, well, if a straight actor is better fit for the role, then I'm perfectly fine with that?
I mean, I've always been cheering for us to play like, you know, like if there's a gay role or a queer role for you know, a character for a movie or a TV show, I'm always here for, you know, a queer person to actually play that role, because again, I feel like we're talented too, you know, and when it's clearly we're super talented. Like, look, there's so many actors and, you know, like actors and well-known actors too that's really good for a lot of roles that, you know, could be taken in TV and movies right now. But unfortunately, a lot of them are played by straight actors, and I get so annoyed when I'm like, oh, I wonder if that person's queer in real life, and then I go on IMDb or Wikipedia or whatever, and I'm disappointed. And not only because like I like, damn, I'm attracted to them or whatever it is the fact that I want to see more of us win, you know, like I want to see us up there winning an Oscar or, you know, a Golden Globe or whatever like that. Like, I just want to see us more on the forefront. And it's starting to get there. Like, I'm starting to see smaller things, but I just want us to like, I just want it to keep going. I want the ball to keep rolling and going harder. Sorry for dogs.
I'm gonna say something that is gonna sound really bad at first, but I have a button, I promise. So generally, I know. So generally, when it comes to gay actors or queer actors playing queer roles, I'm generally against it because I'm kind of like, well, you should be able to act gay or act straight or whatever the fuck. Like, it's not the same as skin color, where it's like if you can't cast a white person as a black character, like that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But that being said, there's already prejudice. So like the thing in Hollywood is like, oh, like, yeah, we can have a straight actor play gay because you can play gay, but there's prejudice against people that's like, oh, you're gay, you can't play straight, and they won't even be given the chance to do that. So until that gets fixed, which again, that's not going to be an overnight thing, that's going to be a progress thing, then yeah, I'm very much like let only gay queer actors play queer roles, because right now they're not being afforded the luxury, I guess, to play otherwise, to give their acting like chops a showcase by playing a straight role. Which again, it sucks that I even have to say that, but that's my issue with that specific argument.
So this is funny to me because I was watching Alien Covenant last night, and I know Jussie Smollett is problematic currently at the moment.
Yeah,
but I was like, oh, he's straight in this because obviously he's making out with a woman, about to have a sex scene, and then he gets killed. And I mean, at that time, he was already out as a queer man before all of that. So I was just like, oh, I forgot that he was playing this type of role, because I've seen a couple of his indie films. I seen The Skinny that he was in, and that was before he came out. And then he came out when he was on Empire. So when I see him in Alien Covenant, I was like, oh, so he is playing, a straight character in there, which is pretty cool. I was excited for that because, again, I don't really know too many openly gay actors playing straight characters. So you just brought that to my memory, and that was just last night.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I've seen a lot kind of evolve over the last 3 years is just how many more people are coming out as pansexual.
Right.
And I feel like that is hopefully a great opportunity for the future. It's like blending those lines, you know what I mean? Like the good thing about casting queer people in queer roles is you get the authenticity. It's a lived experience that they can tap into. It's also, as Bobby mentioned, as Trace, as you mentioned, the luxury, or we all mentioned actually, the opportunity of, we want queer people to go on and succeed. And there's so many, like, it's like, it tends to be like straight people like to play queer roles because then they might get nominated for an Oscar.
I think too, when it comes to lived experience, I'm more like, I need the writer to have the lived experience more so than I need the actor to have the lived experience.
Yeah, I was thinking that because there's so many of our stories that we can tell. It's not just about us being like slashed up in these slasher movies. Like, we have a lot of horror stories within the gay community that that can be told on TV and film and things like that. So I feel like you're right. Like, I feel like if a writer get into that and like just tell a well-made like story, and it happens to get made into a film or a TV show, that would be amazing, because we have so many stories, man. So many. I know I do, but
we want to hear them.
Right. Yeah. I feel like one of the benefits that we're seeing, because, we sort of started this conversation talking about how it's just really hard to get features made. It's hard to get TV shows made. And I think unless something is done to help finance more of those kinds of projects, it's going to be difficult for a lot of people to break in, which means we're not going to get some of that authenticity in the storytelling. But one of the things that I found encouraging is increasingly when we're seeing, I would say specifically trans actors getting cast in roles, often they end up getting consultation credits, because they help to flesh out their characters and they change the way that they speak, that they act, that they dress, and that kind of stuff. So I wonder if that's almost a way to get inroads in, where it's like, oh, okay, well, sure, I've been cast for the authenticity of saying, okay, yeah, we've got the appropriate person in the appropriate role, but also then they have the capacity to change the storytelling or work with the writer, the director, and so on.
Yeah.
I'm thinking specifically of like Assassination Nation, because I know that Hari Naf worked very closely with Sam Levinson to be like, nope, you're getting this character wrong. Let me tell you how we should switch this.
I mean, it would all be better if things like that were more collaborative, right? Like, we're lucky that Sam Levinson did that, and we're fortunate that he did that. I do wish that, more creators and studios would be open to that idea of like, yeah,
Right.
like let's, if we have this kind of a character, yeah, let's work with the actor or at least whoever it's based on, or at least someone who embodies that to flesh out that character, especially if you were the writer, if you are not a trans person writing a trans character.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got another potentially loaded question that does kind of have something to do a bit more with the industry. So I'm thinking of a range of different very queer projects, right? So we've got they/them coming to Peacock. We had Saint Maud basically get absolutely fucking dropped, and suddenly it shows up on Epics. Even things like Black Christmas debuts in theaters, but also mostly it goes to VOD. Do we feel like queer-led projects are not being seen on the big screen and are going direct to streaming? And is that a problem?
I think they are going more direct to streaming, but I would be more bothered by that if I thought the theater industry was thriving.
Fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's indicative of, you know, it's almost hard to get any sort of movie with like a real human being in the story. Like they have to be like a superhero or sci-fi or something to get there. Mostly.
Yeah. So, with they/them, I'm kind of like, oh, it's just doing Peacock, but it's at the same time, I'm like, but I can understand how that a studio might see that as a more of a financial risk where they don't want to put the money. And granted, is that okay? Not really. But I'm also not an industry expert, but I'm also willing to believe that the majority of viewers aren't going to jump out of their seats to go see a transgender-led slasher movie. And that's something where I hope that, like, you know, I'm glad they made it. It's going to Peacock. That's great. So hopefully it gets more eyes on it, because what I have seen in this pandemic is that not like I thought, oh, everyone went to go see Halloween Kills last year. I'm sorry, wrong example. Scream. I thought everyone went to go see Scream in theaters. And then literally as soon as that hit streaming, my timeline is flooded with first-time watches of this movie. And I'm like, oh, I guess I'm in a bubble where not everyone goes to the theaters like I do anymore. And so I'm kind of a mindset where I think it's bad because it shows that they don't have faith that people will go see it with reason. I think there's justifications to that, but it's also having it on something like Peacock, which is a free service, or can be free, that it can get a ton of eyes on it. So I'm paying more attention than to how they're marketing it, because I want to see how much money they're putting in their marketing campaign more so than I am into their actual release strategy.
Do you think this is a step though? Like there's like usually steps not people, but steps to take when, you know, releasing film and things like that. I don't really know too much of it because I'm not in that world, in that industry. But I think like a lot of I'm not gonna say mainstream, but like more queer horror going to streaming is a great thing. But I feel like it's probably the next step, and then eventually it'll make it big into the theaters, you know, because I know this is strictly horror and stuff, but I know that film that's about to come out very soon with what is it? I forgot his name. He was on American Horror Story, stuff like that. Anyway, it's like a gay romance movie.
Is it
Bros?
Billy Eichner's Bros?
Yeah, that. And
Okay.
that's going to theater, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
That's going to the theater. So I feel like we're making some huge steps, even though that's not horror. But I feel like if a film like that can do really well, and then enough eyes go into streaming gay horror, I feel like eventually we'll make it there. I mean, we should have been there, but I feel like eventually we'll make it there.
Right.
Well, but that is where we get into horror in general, right? Because I think if they/them was, I don't know, not a horror movie for some reason, I think that would be more likely to go to theaters than if it was a horror movie. Because horror, it as much as we don't like to say this, like it is a niche genre, despite the fact that, again, we have horror film festivals. We don't have romantic comedy film festivals, you know, like it is the genre that really stands out on its own, but it's still a niche genre. So I think that's the issue we're having there. But yeah.
Well, it's like everything. So much of what goes to theaters is like really big IP, and so I think like the moment that we're waiting for is something that happened in 1986 with Nightmare on Elm Street 2. It's like, have we had a queer protagonist of, you know, the final boy or final, you know, queer? that's what we need. We need Laurie Strode to be a lesbian.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. Or
Oh my God, can you imagine people fucking losing their minds if
Yes,
like
that's why I started
Halloween
laughing.
ends is like, and Lori just like runs
She's a
over and kisses
lesbian.
another woman? Like, I've been waiting
She's-
45 years to kiss this woman now
She's
that
like,
Michael's in the
Kyle.
ground.
It'd be Kyle,
it's
right?
the-
Is that her name?
Yeah,
It's the woman holding the iron in that still that went off on Halloween Kills. Like that's Laurie's lover.
God. Okay, somebody at least make that short, please, because
Yes.
obviously they're not going to make it through Blumhouse. But
I'm here
I
to
do.
see it.
I think
my
what we are
coin.
we are in a transitional period. So similar to what you said, Kay, with like, oh yeah, with seeing Nightmare on Elm Street 2, like, which was less of a transitional period for me, but it was a milestone in queer horror cinema. But I think what we're seeing now is, to quote Zoolander, like, queer horror is so hot right now, and
Right.
I think this was realized about 3, maybe 4 years ago, where like, and I mean, I'll add in A24 horror to be like, oh, we can do metaphors for horror movies, like, yay. So I think that is helping, but again, now we're seeing a lot of quantity come in with queer horror right now. Quality is TBD for a lot of these things, and I think
are we though? I made a list and I was like, this is pretty pathetic.
sorry,
it's better than it was.
Sure.
Yes, like comparatively, if we're getting 10 queer horror movies in a year, which maybe that's even too high of a number, but like that is a lot higher than where we were even 2 years ago. I think I saw 3 queer horror. Well, I mean, I'm thinking at South by, like, we saw Hypochondriac, but like, I mean, again, we're seeing a lot more come in than we were before, and so I think now we're in a thing where we and everyone is waiting to see what sticks, what works, what people go to, and then so in like 5 years from now, we're now going to see again more tropes and the umbrella of queer horror.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so maybe to sort of guide this conversation to ish a close, I'd like to come back to Bobby's comment at the beginning. So like, where do we see the future of queer horror in terms of representation? Let's say that we're getting minimum 10 new movies a year. What are those 10 that we want to see? Who are they populated by? What stories are they telling? I will take an easy one. I will take the easy. I would like to see more queers who are not gay white men. I would like to see more color, and I would like to see more trans characters.
Speaking of trans characters, and speaking of horror that is not necessarily a movie yet, I just really, really want to recommend. Reverse.
No, it looks normal for us. It looks normal for us.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Manhunt.
This is the first time I've ever done.
I've never zoomed before.
Video comments. No, but yes, Manhunt by Gretchen Felker Martin is an incredible book. I just absolutely loved it. Most of the characters are trans, and it's this sort of, it's kind of like what's the movie? I Am Legend, Omega Man kind of thing. It's like post-apocalyptic men, like everything with a Y chromosome is basically devolved into these creatures, like these sort of like rabid animals, kind of like Y the Last Man.
Yeah.
But of course, you look at those there are a lot of those stories, but it's like, well, what does that mean for trans people? Like, and so it's about these trans characters surviving and trying to prevent themselves from devolving. And there are ways that they can do it. But it's the apocalypse. And reading the story, I was just I'm like almost 40 years old. And it was like, this is the first time I've ever seen any characters. And it's not even just one, it's most of them. And in a book, you get to see the inner lives of these characters. You get to hear their thoughts, learn more about their past. And it was, I don't know, just really, really special, and would be an awesome movie. So I hope we do get a movie like that, or a series. And it's written by a trans author, so it would be super cool.
I will hard co-sign on that. Not only is it incredibly cinematic, it's like fucking scary. it's also really like smutty in a good way. Like I learned so much about trans sex from that book that I was like, I did not know this.
You're
And this is
speaking-
really informative and really.
You're saying a lot of words that I'm like ding 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 ding
No,
ding.
Right.
There's a reason that people are like shouting
say
about that book from
smutty?
the rooftop. It is like because these characters have fucking sex, and it's not like I kiss you and the lights fade out. It's like, let me talk about juices. Let me talk about fingering. Let me talk about like wiping cum off of my leg. It's good shit.
Which is also not a queer specific thing that happens, by the way, but straight people don't want to talk about that.
Right.
Yes, but as a trans person, there's a lot of, I don't know, it can be kind of weird, like the sensitivity about like, I want to be addressed with she, her pronouns. I identify as a woman. I want to be treated and acknowledged as such. But, these characters have to deal with certain realities that it's like, I can't just, personally, I can't live in a fantasy world where I am like in every all ways, having a female experience. And so I do appreciate that it acknowledges that in the book.
Yep.
And it acknowledges that the struggles and the realities that and J.K. They murdered J.K. Rowling in the book.
Well, it was because they acknowledge those struggles, those troubles, without making it the focus of the book and the character arc. Is what I'm gathering from what you're saying.
Right, just like any other character in any other book that would take the time to mention sort of like trivial or just like mundane or daily or just a casual experience that is authentic to that character or story.
Okay, Bobby, do you have any insight about if you had a dream queer horror project, what would you want to see in that?
I just want us to be in like more fun horror, I say this on my podcast, and I say this to a lot of people, that ask me a similar question. Like, I want to see like queer werewolves, just a pack of like not kids, like teenagers to, young adult, early 20s, just werewolves of different like colors and everything. And just maybe, I don't want to say like a Lost Boy werewolves, maybe something a little bit different, but I just want to see more fun and adventure. We don't always have to, talk about our traumatic stories and things like that. Why can't we just do fun shit? You know what I mean? I feel that same way about just Black horror. Like, I'm tired of us talking about our traumatic shit. Like, I mean, I love it. It needs to be told, but at the same time, we can do a bunch of shit too. So same thing for queer horror. I just want to see us more in fun queer horror roles.
I think Fear Street was a great example for me. They do acknowledge, sort of like homophobia to some degree in it. But it, I thought that I love the Fear Street movies, and I just thought those characters felt real. Their queerness was not a huge plot point. There's affection; they show affection to each other, and it was fun. It was like kind of like hip and light, and another property where younger queer youth can see themselves and know that.
I'm so jealous of this generations of, they getting all the good shit. I didn't have this shit in the 90s.
Well, but we were kind of, in a lot of ways, we were not seen. So it's like people didn't come after us in certain ways. I mean, hate crimes are not anything new, but I feel like it's almost like, the more that queer people have been accepted, it almost like crossed this threshold where people are like, well, we didn't want you to be that accepted. Now there's like a backlash. And so I'm actually like terrified. Like it took me a long time to realize I was trans, but I think about, had I been figuring this out in this current climate, it just breaks my heart for the kids out there now.
It's like it's the best and worst scenario, right? Like you're getting more inclusive media and more of it than ever before, but also you're dealing with worse real life shit than maybe we have had to deal with in a couple of decades.
Because we're being seen as a threat in numbers. Before it was almost like
We couldn't
an
mobilize.
existential. It was an existential threat before. It was like, a lot of anti-queer thinking. It comes from this place of like how people view, like I with men, the way I view like transphobic men, it's more than transphobic. They're misogynist because they view, a lot of men view women as sexual objects. And so if you have a trans person saying I'm a woman, then they're like, well, now I have to decide, every woman I meet, I think, would I fuck them? And so now you're entering a trans person into and it's like, I don't want to think about that concept. And it's like, well, you just treat everyone as individuals and not like immediately wonder if you would fuck them.
It's human laziness and the inability, and again, the inability to see the abstract. And I'm not trying to like say like, oh, being trans is abstract, but it's not the binary, right? Like it's not what we were used to with as in like human beings. As black and white, yes, no, right, wrong, whatever. And so sometimes when you throw that mix in there, it just people, again, if they just did the work, if they just sat there and thought about it, I really feel like we'd be in a better place as a society. But because people are just like, no, that does not fit into my preconceived notion of what life is, that's the problem.
Right. Which is like for so many things, though. It's like the very basic concept of acknowledging that everyone has a different experience than you.
Right.
Yes.
But
and that's where representation comes in.
Yep. Exactly.
I'll give my final thought, which is going to be also kind of a cop-out answer like Joe's, but mine is I actually don't have a preference. I want to see everything, and including the bad stuff, even the stuff that's meant for straight audiences, because I don't know about y'all, but I have still seen people that are like, oh, you're fine now. The gays are fine now because like you have gay marriage
equality, we're good. Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm like, no. And so that's why, I mean, again, with chapter 2, like I agree with what y'all were saying about like, how it stands with the rest of the film, but just the mere inclusion of a gay bashing scene in that movie, I'm like, no, fuck it. Like, let them see that shit. But I do think it's interesting in today's world with social media, how much access we have to the creators, where we're like, no, like what are your life experiences? I have to know this before I will give this this representation a pass, because we didn't have that ability in the 80s, the 90s, right, or even the early 2000s, right? Like if we were getting queer stories, we weren't really aware who was telling those stories outside of the name on the credits. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing now. I actually think that's really good now, but it's opened up doors to where I think, again, as we as a community, rightfully so, we're a bit defensive about the way we're portrayed in media. Mm-hmm. I also think it's kind of it's a double-edged sword where it's like, okay, so to me, the work should stand on itself. So again, like I'm watching chapter 2, I'm like, okay, well, thematically, this doesn't really work in the narrative of the movie. Like it feels like it's in here for just shoehorn measure. But if Annie Muschietti and whoever wrote the fuck out of that movie was like a big old mo, would we give them more of a pass? Because we're like, oh, but it's a queer person telling this story. I think those conversations need to happen. I think that's great. And I think it really opens up a lot of conversations. But I also think that sometimes people are either on the attack or on the defense, and not just on our side, like on every side. So I want more of these stories because I want to have these conversations, but I want to have these conversations with very certain people.
Well, I think either that, or we need to be able to also separate, like, let's talk about the movie and what the movie is doing or what the TV show is doing, and be able to say like, this worked, this didn't like the way they edited that one sequence, blah, blah, blah. And then also be able to have like the real world conversation like we're having right now, right? I love to be able to have these kinds of conversations because I feel like they expose me and my limited worldview, because part of me is like, oh, well, I'm happy with these kinds of queer storytelling. And then other people come in and they're like, well, what about this? Like, don't you want a bit more of that? Don't you want a little less of that? And I'm like, oh, my experience is not universal. What a fucking shock. Like, I think it's important for people to be challenged outside of their comfort zone so that they realize, oh, I occupy certain status, certain privilege, certain life experiences. Other people do not. And we all have to exist and move through this world. And I feel like, hey, that's part of what you were trying to get at, right? Which is like, if we could understand that each person is different, but also still living their own fucking life, and they need to be able to continue doing so, even if somebody else doesn't like what they stand for or who they are. It's like, well, too fucking bad. I'm still over here living my goddamn life, and I still deserve media that reflects who I am or things that I like. Sorry, that was ranty.
No.
Wow, this whole topic is deserving of rants.
Well, it's because again, like there is no right or wrong answer to anything. There is a wrong answer to some things we've said, but we can all we all want different things. We all have different life experiences. We all know different things, and so again, I think at the end of the day, when it comes to discourse about things like this, I'm all for it. It's just like it pains. I feel like so many of us, again, as film watchers, not queer film watchers, but film watchers in general, we get so protective of certain movies or so antagonistic toward certain movies. It becomes a personal thing, which I get when it comes to queerness, it is personal for us because because of our experiences. Yeah. But at the same time, I would just ask that, when having these discussions, try to take a breath and just let's talk about it. I am not right all the time, and no matter how much I would like to believe that I am. And I'm more inclined to, I know, it's on record, but I'm more inclined to when I have this conversation, if I'm not for lack of a better term, called out when I'm wrong or my opinion maybe isn't the most well-informed opinion, talk to me. Don't be retweeting my thing to your 20,000 followers and being look at this fucker right here.
This bitch. Yeah.
Well, I think it's important to remember on all, because this is how the internet works now. It's no, whatever the topic is, this sort of experience, this experience or intense or whatever, is, I think, indicative of the technology. And had we had Twitter in 1980s or 90s, we'd be just as shitty. Worse.
Can you imagine what the opening weekend of Nightmare on Elm Street 2 looks like with Twitter? It's not great, folks. It's not great.
But this is our reality now, and it's just always good for us to be considering these things, to be saying, well, what are more productive ways of getting our points across? But at the same time, I would like a lot of people to just, even if they're oh God, the vitriol and getting, or if we could just turn it down a little bit. And it's well, I don't know, we can also be able to shrug things off more when we get it. Right. You know what I mean? If I don't know.
Well, no, I'm not. Again, all of us, a lot of us have a right to be angry. There are plenty of things to be angry about, and obviously, anger isn't something that you can just put a pin on. But I just think it's important, to be aware and mindful of those things. And at least for me personally, that's also where intent comes into a play for a lot. If there's something a wrong portrayal or again whatever, I'm oh, that doesn't really work. But again, it seems like the creator had the best intentions at heart. I'm not letting them off the hook where I'm oh, it's fine, but I'm more inclined to be okay, well, I can see how this person who doesn't have my lived experience was what they were trying to do, even though they did not get it right at all.
Yeah.
But do you think those type of people should maybe try to connect with somebody rather than just trying to, I'm gonna just go with I think how this is, this is, rather than trying to connect with somebody that's queer or similar to the character that you're writing about? Maybe ask them, sure. I don't know.
Yeah, if their response is, I've got a gay brother, obviously I'm oh, maybe you should have done a little bit more work. So yes, but the intent is going to automatically adjust how I approach them if I ever got a chance to talk to them, but so yeah, it's not a free pass. It's more so how am I going to approach you in a conversation? How angry am I going to be, or if at all, when I walk into this conversation?
Mm-hmm. I guess my big thing is I just think it needs to always be a conversation. Maybe it's a little bit more of a heated conversation depending on what we're talking about. But at the end of the day, it's always better to get an informed opinion about different perspectives as opposed to just going off the fucking rails. I don't know. I'm sort of with Bobby in this regard where I'm we could do with some happy as well. Happy stuff typically doesn't cause as much vitriol.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I want to see fucked up shit, but we also get happy stuff too.
It's horror, y'all.
Yeah, exactly.
But in horror, there's so many different kinds of tones.
I'm just saying, I would love a happy death day with a queer protagonist.
Well, we get Tree and I don't know her name and Freaky, but when that crossover happens,
Yeah.
Make them lovers.
Mhm.
Kay's like,
Yeah.
scissoring.
Yeah.
That is a negative stereotype of lesbians.
I want to say, like, we're talking a lot about how much more we have to go and how disappointing it can be when we don't see ourselves in these studio films. But I just want to say, if you're out there, we don't have to wait. We can tell our own stories, and people are, and we should seek them out, and we should support them, even if they're not a $5 million or $50 million project. There's just
Right.
I see a lot, I review a lot of submissions, and it's out there, and we want more of it, and we've featured a lot of really great projects, and so the opportunity to do it ourselves is there, and so I would love for us to just be in control of our own destiny more, and not give people a free pass, or be like, well, if you're not going to give it to us, then we'll make it ourselves. And I think that should be inspiring, and I hope to see more of it.
Viewers also, because I feel like, we're in the thick of it. Like, we are in the, Kay, you more so than even the rest of us, because you run a film festival, so you see so much more stuff that doesn't ever get to see the light of day sometimes. And I think viewers, if you were like, oh, where is all this queer horror you're talking about? Like, yeah, you've seen Happy Death Day, you've seen maybe Midnight Kiss if you have Hulu, but it's a thing where it's like a lot of these smaller films that are being dropped on streamers, sometimes dumped on streamers, they're there. Follow, not to make this like a plug, but like follow us, like follow other queer horror journalists, writers, creators, because I can promise you we are seeking out this content, and if we find one that's good, or at least like notable in the sense that, oh, like it's not a good movie but it's doing something I haven't seen before, we'll share it with you. Like, we will do that.
Yeah. And maybe this is a good opportunity. So as we sort of wrap up, and maybe Kay, I can get you to say, how can people get a hold of you if they wanted to follow you and your very political online persona? But also, I know that you're working with a very exciting young trans director from Australia. So tell people how they can get a hold of you, and tell them about Alice.
Well, I'm on Twitter. Video Coven is my handle, but also Salem Horror Fest is there for all those updates. But last year, our jury winner was she's 17 years old now, but she was 16 at the time, of her first feature, So Vam. She's a transgender filmmaker from Australia, as you had mentioned, and she won the jury award. And we have an actual jury. Is that like, oh, of course, the film festival, the trans director, thankfully and deservedly, she got the most, that film got the most votes. And I was just so proud and excited to see someone that young be so talented. And of course, the fact that they're trans is really exciting, because I think that she can inspire a lot more young people to follow in her footsteps. So coming out next month in June, or this month,
it'll be out by the time that this episode drops.
Month.
Great. So Vam is the film that's dropping on VOD, but she's also has a second feature that is finished called Bad Girl Boogie, that's coming out soon, and it's a queer slasher. So it's very exciting. And I just full disclosure, I'm a producer on the project, so I just feel like if I'm gonna plug it, I should mention I am involved with the project, but I am involved with the project because I'm just so proud and excited for her that I'm gonna do whatever I can to make her, the Clive Barker of trans creators, which
there we go.
we're getting a trans character coming in Clive Barker property soon. So the content is out there, and last, I just want to say that, like, thankfully the horror industry is, I feel very fortunate that we have that all the major players are doing the work, and obviously we could do more, but like when I see what Shudder is doing, and I have these conversations, and I see who Fangoria is hiring, and it is If there are any non-queer people watching, like, it is appreciated. And
Yeah.
so we are lucky in some ways.
We're pointed in the right direction. We just still have a journey to go.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. And Bobby, how can people get a hold of you?
You can find me Bobby Torrez with a Z, not an S, on Twitter. Twitter, Instagram, Bobby Likes It Spooky on YouTube, not Booby Spooky.
Is that one available? Maybe.
You know what? I'll start my second channel and we'll see what we do with that one.
OnlyFans coming soon.
That's your OnlyFans. Your
Yes!
OnlyFans.
Yeah, so you can find me there, also on people_scares at people_scares Twitter handle. I'm on that podcast with my buddy Mike Brown, and that's been a fun ride as well. So you can find me all on those platforms.
Woo. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you both so much for joining us on this wild discussion. Yeah, folks, keep seeking out queer horror films. If you find one that's good, if you find one that's bad, shout it from the rooftops and let people know.
Mhm.
Yes.
Happy Pride.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yes.
Woo.